This happened many years ago when I was an undergraduate student. I worked at a well-known convenience store chain. This particular Monday night, I was working until 11 PM, so I was the only employee from 9 on. It was an older store, so space was very limited and cramped. The only cameras were aimed at the cash register. The store was located between the university classrooms and the housing. It was close enough to walk from campus and back to get snacks and drinks between classes, is what I'm saying. But business was fairly slow after 9 PM during the week. Now I was stocking the shelves when a man entered. He wore a brown jacket and faded blue jeans. He went to the back of the store by the beer coolers. He was wearing sunglasses when he come up to the counter with a 12-pack of beer. Now my hair rose on the back of my neck. It was dark out and the customer put on sunglasses. Suddenly, he pulled out a gun and aimed it at my face. He told me to empty the till. He didn't ask about the cash drop or safe. He grabbed the cigars on the counter and told me to empty the overhead cigarette bins and lottery tickets and took my wallet. I sure as hell thought I was gonna die when he made me lie on the floor behind the counter. I just closed my eyes and started praying. I exhaled a huge sigh of relief when I heard the doors open. I worked at an outdoor mall in a great neighbourhood. You'd assume that it'd be safe as hell there, but then again, you can't be sure anymore. There are creepy people everywhere and I just can't help shake the feeling that this isn't my last encounter with this guy. So I'm a 19-year-old and I work at a kiosk. It's usually teens and young adults and occasionally some older adults that shop with us. There is this one guy, however, who is very recognisable. He does come in pretty often. He always has the same leather jacket, crinkle corner of his eyes, one front tooth shorter than all the others, and he slouches in some weird way when he walks. Now he's usually just harmless, but my god has he made me feel uncomfortable the last couple of times that he's been here. I greet every customer with, "Hey, can I help you find anything?" And most of them tell me that they're just looking. He always just smiles at me and says, "Just looking, darling." I can imagine that. God. At first it was fine. I didn't care whatsoever. He seemed like a harmless 50 or so year old man. He spent a very long time looking at the display cabinet and never bought anything though. Now I usually do the night shift when I'm working here. I'm usually on my own in the back. There's the odd friendly security woman who stops and has a chat with me, but she comes by every half an hour or so. So there's very few people where I am, and the only other stores in my view are a Reebok and Mackey's. Now a few nights ago while I was sitting at the kiosk bored out of my mind, the security lady had already continued on her way. I scrolled through Reddit and was getting ready to open up Netflix and continue watching some shows. I suddenly hear footsteps coming up behind me. I look up and see the creepy man staring at me, but he's not actually at the kiosk yet. I wave at him and he gives me this little smile, but the one that sends chills up my spine. It's almost a very unnatural smile. You can tell that it's hiding something. A customer walks up and I immediately jump at the chance to help them, trying to shake this feeling I'm having. Now I just finish up with that customer and write them a receipt. I then glanced up quickly and see that the guy's still staring at me. Before I could say anything, he started walking over. He's taken my eye contact as permission to come and join me. "Evening, darling," he said, doing almost a bow. "Good evening," I told him. He then proceeded doing his normal, checking out the display cabinet and not actually buying anything. He then started asking me questions like we were lifelong friends. "So darling, do you have a boyfriend?" Now at this point, I'd been single for about a year. I told him no. I didn't have a boyfriend, but there was a checkout girl that I thought was pretty cute at my local grocery store. "I see," he said. "Do you have any plans after work?" he asked me. I'm getting uneasy at this point, but I told him yes, I was going to a party. "You gonna hook up with any boys?" he asked me. My jaw dropped. Whether or not I was hooking up with any boys was not in the line of question. Because I told him no, he smiled and said, "Good, you're too pretty for them boys anyway." He faced me up again and came to hug me. At this point, I hadn't realised that my heart was racing, and it became apparent because I couldn't breathe. Before I actually could tell him to do anything, the security woman Linda walked up and glared at him. "Sir, if you're not going to buy anything, stay away from this young woman. I suggest you go loiter somewhere else." He stiffened at the sound of Linda's voice and he left. "You right, honey?" she asked me, and I shrugged. "He's always here," I told her, and she shook her head. "Let me and Russ walk you to your car after work, okay?" Now the rest of my shift goes fine. I get through it and manage to make my boss some more money. At 10 o'clock on the dot, Linda and her boyfriend Russ are at my kiosk. They wait for me to pack up and take my purse and then walk me to my little Prius. They waited for me to drive away as well. On my way to the party, I stopped by a gas station to fill up the tank. As I'm waiting for it to fill up, I see the man from the mall at the mini-mart. He's buying a pack of cigarettes and he looks out the window and sees me. When he does, he smiles and waves. He holds up one finger asking for me to wait a minute. I don't. I yank out the fuel hose and jump in my car, booking it out of there. I took several detours before arriving 30 minutes late to the party. I had to make sure that I lost him before showing up. Now it's been a few shifts since and I've not seen him, but I'm almost certain that he's going to come back for me. This time, I don't know if it's going to be at my work or even worse. So a little backstory before I tell you one of the most crazy experiences of mine that happened during my 2-year security career from 2013 to 2015. So I'm a 6'7" male and I live in Australia. I'd like to think that I'm a fairly tough individual and I don't get easily intimidated, but some of the stuff that used to go on at the mall that I worked at for the night shift still gives me goosebumps to this day. So the mall that I worked at was very, very large, probably the largest in my state. And all the way up until about 8:30 PM, it would still be quite busy. It was only around 9:30 we would manage to usher all of the stragglers out, and by about 11 PM, all of the business owners would have to leave. My job at this point was just to patrol the mall and make sure nobody was sticking round. Now we weren't allowed to have any weapons. The only thing we could carry was some mace. Now there were multiple occasions where we would find would-be thieves hiding around trying to break into shops after dark, but they were normally far outnumbered by 4 or 5 of us on the shift at the time. Usually without fail they just turn themselves in and not want any of the hassle that would come with fighting us. However, on this one particular night shift, things started getting really weird for me. I'd say it was about 2 o'clock and I was standing in the middle of the empty food court eating a sandwich. This was the only part of the mall that had any light at night time due to the skylight, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating though, I heard a dull scraping noise from the hallway leading off to the food courts and to the toilets. It really sounded like somebody was dragging a piece of metal on the floor. I was immediately put on edge by this and I flicked on my torch without a moment's hesitation. I can remember creeping down the hallway, flashlight in hand, illuminating a good 6 or 7 meters in front of me. As I got closer and closer to the end of the hallway, the noise became louder and louder until I was at the very end of the hallway, and there was the toilet doors to the left and right of me. I could tell the sound was coming from the female toilet, so I stood there for a second in hesitation, then I slowly gripped the handle and opened the door a tiny bit. The noise was not very clear and it had me very scared. I'm confused, so I yell out, "Oi, who's in there?" The noise suddenly stopped. I paused a moment, listening hard through the tiny crack of the door, and I swear to God I could hear breathing, low male breathing. I then shut the door, still gripping the handle, and flicked on my radio. "This is 1-3, I need help in the food court, somebody's in the bathrooms here." No response. That was really strange and it put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio without fail, so for it to be so silent, that was quite alarming. "This is 1-3, anyone copy?" Still no response. I can remember whispering to myself, "What the hell?" I again hesitated but decided to creak the door open a little more. I then said, "Listen mate, trying to sound as intimidating as possible. If you don't come out with your hands up, it's gonna end with all of your teeth coming out, alright? Do you want that? I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point, but there was no response. In fact, there was no noise at all now. I then yelled into the bathroom, "Okay mate, I'm coming in. If you do anything stupid, it's not my fault you're never gonna walk again." I tried my hardest to sound scary, but my voice was quivering at this point. The whole situation made no sense. Why would somebody be lingering around in the female bathrooms? Why couldn't I have gotten any response on any of the radio calls I made? What was that metal noise? What was happening? I then very slowly and cautiously opened the door. I scanned my flashlight slowly across the room. All of the cubicles were now weirdly open. Other than that, the room was totally empty. I was absolutely terrified about now. I definitely wasn't losing it. I then walked into the center of the bathroom, closing the door behind me. I was so scared to the core that I actually let out a sound. I then said aloud, "Come on, this is like horror movie stuff. This is really messed up, just come out." When I then heard the long, whining squeak of the door behind me close, I span around, basically crying at this point, and shone my torch onto a massive man. He was at least a foot taller than me. He had his matte grey hair and he looked to be in his 40s or something like that. He had some dirt on him too. He was mid-opening the door, but he stopped dead in the middle of his action. He then looked at me, smiling this guilty smile like a kid would when they get caught stealing biscuits or something. I'm not gonna lie, I was scared froze. He lifted his fingers up to his mouth and ushered for me to be quiet. He suddenly swings the door all the way open and sprints out with this small metal box in his hand. I was just totally at a loss. Turns out he was just behind the toilet door while I was still opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so close to him and I didn't even notice. He could have killed me if he had a knife or something like that, and this still haunts me to this day. Later that night, my radio miraculously started working again, and right on the cue, I was able to tell my co-workers my story. They collectively went pale when I told them what happened. They all had similar stories, but none quite as terrifying as mine. I worked the night shift for another week before I quit. I'm not sticking around a job like that, and I needed help, and why was my radio not working? Why could I not get help? Why did I have to deal with that alone? And why was I in such danger? This happened back in 2010. I was working in a hotel in a suburban area. It was a pretty nice place. When I started there, I was both a PT front desk clerk and a PT night auditor. For those of you who don't work in this industry, I closed the day out on the computers and on the night shift. I had just been promoted to a day job and had a week left at the front desk before I was switching to Monday to Friday, and it was just like any other night. At around 3 AM, I received a phone call. There was this guy at my age. He tried to strike up a conversation with me. I give him my name when answering the phone, so he gets my name, of course. He then starts asking me weird questions. He keeps on asking stuff like if I want to go for a drink, etc. They were harmless, but nevertheless, I tell him that I'm hanging up, that I had a job to do. He wouldn't give me a name. Instead, he tells me, "Why don't you call me John?" I hang up and finish my shift. The next night, at around 3:30 AM, I received another phone call from John. He started out by asking me to go for a drink again. I declined and hung up the phone. He called me back about 5 times every night, each time getting more and more weird with the comments he was saying. He ended up with his last call with the phrase, "I love you like singing karaoke. I love doing that. Let's go do that sometime." Things got really weird when he found my Twitter. I'd gone out a few nights prior with my friends and posted about it. I asked him about how he got my full name and he wouldn't tell me. I hung up again and he was done that night. I deleted my Twitter and the pages. When my boss came in at about 7 AM, I told him about what was going on. We told my GM and the security guard had a report on it. Now I would only work about 2 overnight shifts a week. Unluckily for me, When I came back the next week, he followed. The phone call started again at around 3 AM and lasted for an hour or so, but this time he was a little different. John was angry that I deleted all my accounts so he couldn't keep an eye on me and make sure I wasn't cheating on him. I told him to go away and that I'm not answering my phone anymore. My security guard will be taking all of my calls and I'm gonna forward them. The phone then went quiet for about 10 seconds and then he screamed, "You're gonna be with me if you like it or not. I'm coming for you right now, stay put," and hung up the phone. I then freaked the hell out and called the cops. Luckily, I had my security guard there so I wasn't completely alone. Now it must have been a slow night because it took the cops only a few minutes to get there. I then called my supervisor who left at 11 PM and he then called the manager to calm me down. One of the cops then stayed with me for the rest of my shift. I told my boss about what had happened and from then on I only had 1 week left of overnights. I just couldn't do it anymore and I wouldn't. Thankfully after that, everything stopped. I'm just worried though that he's still out there, and the thing is, even if I leave this job, he's still probably gonna follow me. He knows my name and most of my social media stuff. I just hope that this is the last of it. I was a janitor at my local gym. I was mopping the floors and had my back to the door, listening to my iPod. I turned around and see there was a man there dressed in a super sketchy looking UPS costume. He had his face pressed to the glass door, smiling and tapping on the window with one finger. He started shouting at me that I have to let him in. He has a package to give me. Now this scares the life out of me. It's 1:30 AM. I told him to go away and called the cops. They then later found him trying to break into a house further down the road. My dad used to work night shifts at an old abandoned complex. Now he was doing a security guard job. The place was supposed to be haunted and there was this basement area that none of them would go in no matter what. My dad told me that even if they had trouble there, they were just told to avoid it and ignore it because it wasn't actually anybody there. My dad was always confused by this and just thought it was the other guys trying to scare him. So one night, he gets a call saying that there's some disturbances going on and he thinks that it's coming from the basement area. My dad was sure that the reason he got the call to go down there was because the guy calling him was too scared to go himself. My dad just called him a wussy and hung up and went to go and investigate. Now my dad said there was something off this night. It wasn't particularly that cold out this night, but from the second my dad stepped outside the warm office, he immediately got goosebumps all up his spine and on his arms. He also felt very uneased. Now he was sure that this was just paranoia because obviously working at night, your mind's always going to play tricks on you, and he began heading towards where the basement was. Now it was quite a walk, so he had quite a lot of time. As he was walking there, he went to radio back to let the guy know that he had just set out, but his radio wasn't working. Now my dad thought this was odd, but because this was a few years ago, he was sure that was because the battery life on them wasn't that good back then, or at least not on the radios that they had. He did eventually get to the basement thing, and he turned back and he could see that one of the guys was watching him from afar. He could see that one of the guys wasn't doing anything, he was just staring. My dad called out, "Yeah, don't worry you wussy, I'm gonna go down there," waved at him and laughed and started heading towards the basement. Just as he did that, he got another call on the radio. He couldn't really make out what it was saying. It almost sounded like whispering, but he was certain that he heard something saying "get out of there." My dad then turned to look towards the basement again. Just as he did that, the door slammed shut on him. "Alright guys, this isn't funny. We're doing a job here, I'm not going to take this off none of you," my dad called back. He went to signal in on the radio to tell the office that the guys were playing tricks on him and to tell him to cut it out, but the radio once again wasn't working. My dad was annoyed by this, and rather than go and investigate what was going on, he was planning to drag one of them down there with him, one of the guys who gets really scared who was playing tricks on him. So he quickly hopped out a window. He then made his way back to where the office was. Just as he was about to knock on the door and go back in, he heard a very loud slam behind him. He turned around to see that the door was now flung open, the one that was locked previously. Not only that, he could see a silhouette standing in the door. For God's sake, I'm not even there now. Meet me back in the office, my dad shouted out. He was starting to get annoyed at this point. He went back in just to make sure that it wasn't anybody who'd actually snuck in and was trying to burgle anywhere. He quickly went back over the cameras and saw that nobody had entered the site. My dad then went to go and make a coffee and he entered the room. Well, this is the last point he was conscious. He then said that as he entered the room, he saw that every one of the security workers was in there. There was nobody else outside but him at the time. My dad then fainted. That was the last time that he ever worked security again. And not only that, a few of the other guys quit too after. I'm currently a janitor at a gym. We have a stairwell that leads down some stairs to a door that doesn't open anymore because we lost the keys to it years ago. So one night, there's a loud banging coming from the door. It almost sounded like somebody was banging it every couple of seconds for at least a few minutes. I stood at the top of the stairs trying to figure out what it was and just watching, and it suddenly stopped. It then started up again a few minutes later. I went back up there and see that it started again and stops as soon as I get up to where it is. I told my manager the next day and I had a locksmith come in. He got to the door and said that it's just an old empty supply closet. So that means every so often at the bottom of the stairs where I work, there's a banging sound coming from an empty locked room.